welcome back. Now that we have our normal maps and our colors laid out, just the flats, and we've applied it to the model, like just the base to the model, we're going to render out one more map. This is our AO, or our ambient occlusion, so this will add just a little bit more depth to our texture. To do that, we're going to start by creating a sphere. So just a normal sphere, it doesn't need to be anything exciting. We're going to affect the pivot only, and we're going to drop it to the bottom of the sphere. So just pulling that down to the bottom of the sphere, doesn't need to be exact. And then I'm going to zero that out on the Z, so it sits at the base of our character. So we don't want her feet to clip through. So I'm going to just bring that up a little bit more. Zero that out. And I'm going to make this an editable poly. I'm then going to delete. I'll make it bigger first. That's probably the best way to go. We'll make it bigger first, so scaling it up and then bringing it down just a little bit. Okay, no. I'll select half of this hemisphere first, so it'll be easier to judge. So delete half of that and then bringing it down so her head is just under the lip of the hemisphere. I'll then need to invert my polygon. So if I grab this by the element, turning on my shaded view, and if I go to object properties and then backface cull, you can see that inside there are no normals. We need the faces to be facing her. So if I go down into element and then find flip, where is that? There it is, right down the bottom. Okay, so now all the faces are facing inwards. Now this is so that when we create our AO, there is something for the light to bounce off of. Some people like to use a plane, so it's just a plane. I tend to find I get a better overall render if I'm using a sphere. So I'm just going to name this now ground sphere. And then I'm going to go File, Export Selected, and I'm going to create an OBJ, so an object, an OBJ, and just call it ground sphere. So I've just made a folder for OBJs and put it in there, and then I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my model. So I need to export an OBJ. So I've already separated them to head and body, so this is the file with that. And then I'm going to grab the body. So this is all of what texture 1, so all of my body texture, all the elements that are in my body texture is in this file. I'm going to go File, Export Selected, and then I'm going to export the OBJ for both the body and the head. So I'll have two separate OBJs for the game model. Once that is done, there is one more thing I need to do. I'm going to create a cage. So I've cloned the body, and I'm going to use push, and I'm just going to push it out ever so slightly from the actual body itself. And then I'm going to go into areas where I know where the detail sticks out, so like where the pockets are. I'm going to pull these out a little bit further so it doesn't clip through the pockets. Now this is the same idea as when we created the normals for our teeth. So when we selected the projection, it created the blue cage. This is what we're doing at this moment. So we're creating the cage for our projection. So just around the areas that I know that will have clipping issues, so around the pockets, around where the boots and the folds are around the pants, just around here at the back side. I'm just going to smooth these out a little bit more. Okay, and around here too, where the pockets of the vest are. So I'm just selecting those areas, and then I'm going applying a push modifier and just pushing out those faces just a little bit. So just pushing those out, so that when I render out the map, we won't have the high res model clipping through the cage. Once that is done, she looks really odd. We'll reset the X form and export selected. So it's important when you create your cage, do not add polygons, do not weld polygons. It needs to have the same amount of verts as your original cage. So now I'm going to open up a program called XNormal to do this. I'm going to go into my low res button and I'll find my body cage. So I'll just right click and go to browse external cage. It'll ask me, are you sure everything it's got the same amount of verts? So I'm going to go yes, because I know it does. Then do the same thing as I'll right click and find my low res and high res mesh. I'll set up my map and hit generate. So this might take a little bit of time. Okay, so now it's finished. We can open up it in Photoshop and we can see the nice grayscale image that it's created. So this is basically a light map where the shadows fall, where the highlights hit, and so on. So we can do it the same again for our head. So we'll go to our low res mesh. I'll make sure I go in for the high res first. We'll add our meshes. So we'll make sure that we've got our ground sphere in there. And we'll right click again and we'll add the head mesh this time. So we've got both meshes there in our high res. So in our low res, we need to right click and go add mesh and find our low res head. But this time I'm going to show you something a little bit different too. So if we hit the tools button, we can calculate the ray distance as well. So if we hit that and hit go, it'll basically leave it for 10-20 seconds. It'll calculate the distance from the two meshes, which would be the best to do. You hit stop and then copy results, and then you can use that to create your AO map. I find I get a better result if I use the cage option, but either is fine as long as you get a result that that you can work with. So I'm just going to create a quick cage for the head here, and then I'm going to bake out the AO the same way as I did the body, and we can move on from there. Okay, so now that we've got our cage, we need to apply it. So we'll right click, we'll use cage, external cage, browse to external cage file, and we'll select our cage and hit OK. Now in our baking options, we need to make sure our texture size is correct, obviously. We can play with the settings here. I've got these ones as I found to be the best for my purposes, and make sure that our file name is correct as well. So where we want it to be saved and what we want it to be called. So Selena Head AO is what I'm going to call it, and then we can hit generate. So that'll take some time. There we go. Yay, magic of computers. So once that's done, I can hit close. And I'll close that one as well and go back into Photoshop, and we can have both maps. So there we go, we've got our light maps baked out as well, or our AO, ambient occlusion. Now what do we do with these? Easy enough. We can open up we'll start with our body. So I'm going to open up the paint layer that I've done for the pants, and I'll bring that in. So copying it all, Control A, copying it into my PSD, just using the Control C, Control V. Then I'm going to select the black background using my magic wand and then deleting it. You shouldn't have any black in your map. So this will be the base of my pants. I'll paint on top of that later. So I'm just going to apply a slight blur to this just to get rid of the speckledy look that it's got here, just a little one. Nothing too exaggerated. There we go. So I'll use that as a base so I can see where the folds are, and I can see where I kind of want the highlights and the shadows. Now, making sure I've also unlocked my wireframe and I brought down the opacity on that and relocked it. Now I need to obviously bring in my light map as well, so the same way as I did everything else, selecting it, copying it and pasting it into my PSD. I've then just applied a multiply to the layer, and then I'm playing with the fill or the opacity. It doesn't really matter which one you choose at this point. You just want to get the look that you're trying to achieve. So I'm bringing this right down. I only want it to be subtle. It's not to be the shadows, it's just to enhance the shadows. So remember, shadows will be applied in game. These are just to make them pop that little bit more. Now I've also made a copy of that layer, so just dragging it down to the layers icon at the bottom there, it'll make a copy. I've then selected the skin area on my flat, so using the magic wand tool to select that, and then on the top layer I've hit the mask button, so that's a little rectangle with the circle in the center. So that means that only that area, the mask, is blocking out. Where it's black, it's not going to be applied. Where it's white, it is being applied. So I'll do the same with the one below too, so that the skin is blocked out and the clothing and everything else is applied to that one. So we've got two different AO layers, both affecting different areas of the body. I'm then going to open up my hue and saturation, so you can do that just by hitting the adjustments layer, little circle with a hemisphere, like half blocked out circle at the bottom there, selecting hue and saturation, and then I'm going to adjust it slightly. So I'm focusing on the skin here at the moment, so I'm just trying to get kind of an orangey brownish tinge to the layer itself, just to bring a little bit of color into it. Nothing too strong, just a little bit of color. There we go. Once I'm happy with that, I'll accidentally put the multiply on the adjustment layer. That's not what I want, so I'll turn that off. Make sure my image layer, my AO layer, is set to multiply, and I'll bring that right back down. And you can see how it just adds that little bit more depth when it's got that little bit of color into it. So we also want only the color to apply to that map. So if I hold Alt and click between the two maps, I get this little arrow that points down to it. So it's basically saying I'm only affecting this layer here. So it becomes linked. So I'm just renaming these now so I know what they are. Now we can start some of the fun stuff. So I've created a new layer here. I'm going to call it shadows, sorry. And I'm going to start painting in. I'm only going to focus on the pants at the moment, but then I'm going to start painting in some of those shadows. So I'm just going to select, using my palette, the darker pants color. I've got a soft brush selected, And I should note that I'm using a graphics tablet, so all of this can be done with the mouse, but I'm using a tablet, so I'm going to be using the opacity and the flow on some of the brushes as well. So just going to bring the hardness down on this brush so it's nice and smooth. I've changed my opacity to 40 and my flow to 60 so that I can gradually build up my color. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to start laying down where some of the shadows lie. So on the inside of the leg, around where the seams are, I'm just going to start laying in this color. You can see here that I've actually gone to my eraser tool as well. So because I'm using a pen, I can just flip it upside down and use the eraser, but you can also hit E on the keyboard, or you can just select the eraser tool as well. So B is brush, and I can resize it using the brackets on the keyboard. And then I'm bringing it back in just to get that soft edge around the shadow. Okay, so I'm just adjusting the opacity now too, so I'm going to block in 100% around the edge. This is just going to help me prevent obvious seams when I apply the texture, or when it's in game. You won't be able to see where the two texture halves attach as much. But yeah, so just blocking that in, and then we can start to blend in the shadows together. So just using the brush tool and playing with the opacities and the brush sizes, and occasionally using the eraser tool as well. You'll also note that I'm only working on the shadows at the moment. I tend to build up the color, so start with the shadows, then we'll add highlights and maybe a bit of texture later. So it's all a building up process. So you start at the bottom and you kind of work your way up. It also gives you, with using a soft brush, will give you a nice mid-tone as well. So you can just add to the base. So we've got our base of the color that we've already created in Mudbox, so we're just building on top of that. So think of it kind of like layers and just adding to it to give it definition. Here I'm going to start to erase some of the detail or the shadow I've put over the pocket. Now obviously the pocket isn't going to have the same kind of look as the rest of the pants. It sticks out, so the shadows will fall in different places. It'll also help me to prevent seaming later when we take it into Max. This will be the hardest place to actually get the seams to match up. So just knocking back the shadow here, and then we'll apply its own shadow detail. Okay, here I'm just pulling out a bit and seeing how the overall effect is looking. I've used the blur tool a little bit just to soften and blur some of the detail together. I've then hit R on the keyboard to rotate the canvas so that I can start working on the back side of the pants. So again, this process will be the same as what I use for the front. I'll be slowly blending in the shadows in from that hard 100% that I used around the edge, and I'm slowly bringing it in, so areas where shadows would naturally form, so like underneath the butt, at the back of the knees, these sorts of areas are going to be a little bit more darker, and I'm just blending those in with the overall color scheme. So yeah, so just again using the brush and the eraser tool and maybe a bit of the blur tool as well, just to get everything to mix together. I should note too, to get out of the rotation, since we pressed R to rotate the canvas, if you wanted to snap it back to the normal canvas direction, just hit escape on the keyboard. So R will rotate the canvas, you'll get up, you'll bring up the little rotation, like direction star, and you can rotate, and then you can just use your brush and your eraser like you normally would, and then you can hit escape to go back to the normal canvas direction. This is easier, particularly when you're using a graphics tablet, but again, it will come in handy when you're using your mouse so that your hand isn't trying to contort into odd positions in order to get the angles that you need. Again, you can see here that I've erased out the shadows that I've done over the pockets. This is obviously to match the front of the pants, so if you do something on the front that is going over the side, you need to make sure that it matches. We'll point it out when we go back into Max, but for now I'm just blocking in the colors. And now I'm going to start to work on the folds. So now that I've done the overall blocking in, this is where the shadow is, I'm going in now and working on the fold. So again, I've turned off the color. You'll see me going back and forth between the color and the normal. So just turning that the layers off, the color layers off, so I can see the normals underneath, in order to help find where the shadows would be. So on the normal map, you can see where the folds are and where the shadows would lie. So I'm using that as a guide. So I'll always be flicking back and forth between putting the color on and turning the color layer off and on, so I can see the normals underneath. I'm not doing this on the normal layer, I'm still in my shadow layer, but yeah, it's just as a guide. Back working on the folds, you can see that I lay down the colour and then I erase from the outside of the stroke in, so that the colour is in where the deepest part of the fold will be. Okay, and I use the blur tool to blend it a little bit so that I don't get it so harsh between the fade out and the solid colour. And again, with the eraser, you can always define your stroke just by removing colour as well. You can see as I go into the shadow part that I've laid down, if I just erase that, it brings out that fold a little bit more as well. So again, when we're doing the fold on the pockets, this is going to be an area that will cause some seam issues in Max when we take it back in. So just laying down the colour, but being aware that we will have to change a lot of this once we take it in and have a look at it in max. Okay, we might leave this video here for now and continue on in the next video.